You did it this week. Maybe you didn't think of it that way. But somewhere between that cup of coffee this morning, that glass of wine last night, or that single puff of something at a party, you altered your mind on purpose. And you didn't stop to ask why. You just did it. Here's what's strange. So did your ancestors, 10,000 years ago. So did the people before them, 40,000 years ago. So did, according to some researchers, the very first behaviorally modern humans who painted animals on cave walls and buried their dead with flowers. Across every culture, every continent, every era of recorded and unrecorded human existence, people have found a way to change how their brain feels. Not by accident. Intentionally. Repeatedly. And the question that almost nobody asks is, why? The real answer is far stranger than you think. Let's start with a plant. Imagine you're walking through what is now the mountains of Peru, roughly 8,000 years ago. You haven't invented writing. You haven't built a city. You're tracking an animal across a ridge, your feet are bare, and you're exhausted. Someone in your group offers you a leaf to chew. It's bitter. Your mouth goes slightly numb. And then, minutes later, the exhaustion lifts. You walk further. Think clearer. Hunt longer. That leaf is coca, the same plant that cocaine is derived from thousands of years later. And you didn't just discover a drug. You discovered something your body was already waiting for. That's the first clue. Your brain has receptor sites, actual molecular locks built into your neurons, that are specifically shaped to receive the active compounds in plants like cannabis, coca, and poppies. Scientists call these the endocannabinoid system, the dopaminergic pathway, and the opioid receptor network. What that means in plain terms is this. Your brain already had the hardware for these chemicals before you ever encountered the plants. The locks existed before the keys arrived. The plants didn't create a vulnerability in you. They found a door that was already there, built into your biology, long before anyone had a word for any of this. That is not a coincidence. That is the beginning of the real story. Anthropologist Andrew Sherratt spent decades studying what he called the secondary products revolution, the moment when ancient humans went beyond using plants purely for food and began seeking them out for their chemical effects on consciousness. What he found was consistent across cultures in ways that couldn't be explained by chance. From the steppes of Central Asia to the river valleys of the Indus to the rainforests of the Amazon, humans were deliberately cultivating, trading, and consuming psychoactive plants at the same time they were developing agriculture, ritual, language, and social structure. These things appeared together, not separately, not accidentally. Something was driving the connection between altered states and the rise of civilization itself. So what was that something? Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the last time you felt genuinely overwhelmed. The last time grief felt like a physical weight pressing against your ribcage. The last time anxiety ran in quiet loops through your mind at 3 in the morning, and you couldn't name what you were afraid of, only that the feeling was real and heavy and it wouldn't stop. Now imagine feeling all of that, without any framework to understand it. No therapist. No language for depression or anxiety or grief. No explanation at all. Just a feeling that presses on you and doesn't lift and has no name. That was your ancestor, sitting at the edge of a fire 50,000 years ago. And then someone handed them a plant. Pain relief has never been only physical. It is one of the oldest problems the human mind has ever faced. Researcher Brian Hayden, an archaeologist at Simon Fraser University, has argued that the first deliberate use of psychoactive substances wasn't recreational at all. It was functional. It happened in ritual contexts, specifically in feasting ceremonies where high-status individuals consumed altered states as a form of social bonding and leadership display. In other words, the shaman who took the mushroom wasn't escaping reality. He was performing reality. He was showing the group that he could travel somewhere they couldn't follow and come back with something useful, that he could speak to forces they couldn't see, that he could hold the terror of the unknown and return from it. That isn't superstition. That is social technology. And here is where it gets even stranger. Researcher Michael Winkelman, a medical anthropologist at Arizona State University, has proposed what he calls the shamanic altered states of consciousness model. The idea that deliberately induced altered states were not a side effect of early human culture, but one of its central engines. When a human brain enters a deep trance state, whether through psychedelic plants, rhythmic drumming, fasting, or controlled breathing, it activates integrative processes that connect normally separate regions of the brain. Pattern recognition accelerates. Emotional processing deepens. Boundaries between different streams of thought become temporarily porous. A person in this state doesn't just feel different. They think differently. They make connections the ordinary waking mind skips over. Now think about what early humans needed most. They needed to solve problems in new environments they had never seen before. They needed to remember the landscape, where water was, where the elk crossed the ridge, where the berries grew before the frost. They needed to understand animal behavior well enough to predict it. They needed to cooperate with strangers from other groups whose language they barely shared. And every so often, something came out of the altered state that proved useful, a memory that clicked into place, a symbol that carried meaning across a fire without words, a feeling of connection so profound it made a person willing to sacrifice something real for the group around them. These weren't delusions. They were outputs from a brain running at a different frequency, producing things the normal mode couldn't reach. Your ancestors didn't start taking substances because they were reckless. They started because the experience gave them something real, and the group recognized it. Let's go further back, much further back. In 2008, a team of archaeologists excavating a burial site in the Judean Desert found traces of a plant mixture in a 3,000-year-old burial shroud, a mixture containing cannabis. But what made this finding significant wasn't the plant itself. It was the context. The shroud was wrapped around the remains of a young woman who had died in childbirth. The plant mixture appeared to have been burned nearby, possibly to ease her pain in the final hours, possibly to assist with the delivery, possibly to help her cross over. This was not recreation. This was medicine. This was care. This was one human being trying with everything they had to ease the suffering of another, using the most powerful tool available to them. That changes the question entirely. It stops being, why did ancient humans start taking drugs? And it becomes, why did ancient humans start taking care of each other? And the evidence in that burial chamber, 3,000 years old, wrapped around a woman who died too young, says they already had, long before the question was ever asked. But medicine is only one thread in this. The other thread is meaning. In 1992, psychopharmacologist Ronald Siegel published a book called Intoxication, in which he made a radical argument that the pursuit of altered states is not a human flaw but a fourth basic drive, as fundamental to animal behavior as hunger, thirst, and sex. He spent years documenting the evidence. Elephants deliberately seeking out fermented fruit and consuming enough to become visibly uncoordinated. Birds eating toxic berries until they tumbled from branches. Cats returning again and again to catnip not out of confusion, but because, on some level, the experience itself is something their nervous system seeks. The drive toward altered states, Siegel argued, appears across species in patterns so consistent that it cannot be explained as a cultural mistake. It looks, instead, like a feature. What that means for you is both uncomfortable and important. The part of you that reaches for a drink at the end of a hard day, that craves caffeine when your focus slips, that wants to soften the edges of an evening that's gone on too long, that part of you is not broken. It is ancient. It is operating exactly as your ancestors' nervous systems operated across tens of thousands of years. It is doing what brains have been doing since before the word drug existed, seeking a way to change the signal, to dial the frequency up or down, to get a moment of relief from the weight of being a conscious creature in a world that is sometimes too much. The question has never really been whether humans seek altered states. They always have, in every culture, without exception. The real question is what they do with what they find there. Ancient ritual gave the altered state a container. It gave it meaning, timing, community, and a shared framework for interpreting what came back from the other side. The shaman who returned from a vision wasn't asked what it felt like. He was asked what he saw, what it meant, what the group should do next. The experience was immediately translated into something useful, a direction, a warning, a story, a ceremony, a song that carried information across generations without paper. The altered state was a tool embedded in a structure, not an escape from the world, but a specific, controlled entry into a deeper layer of it. What happened to that structure is a longer story, one that involves conquest, criminalization, and the slow severing of context from substances that were never designed to be used without ceremony, without community, without interpretation. Stripped of the container, the same compounds that once organized a society around meaning became something that could unravel a person in isolation. The plant didn't change. The structure around it collapsed. But here is what the science keeps circling back to. You are not a modern person who stumbled into drugs. You are an ancient nervous system operating inside a modern world, carrying biology that evolved hundreds of thousands of years before cities, before governments, before the idea that consciousness should feel a single particular way all of the time, without variation, without relief, without mystery. Your brain came pre-equipped with molecular receptor sites for plant compounds that predate agriculture. Your ancestors used those compounds to heal, to bond, to lead, to grieve, to mark the passage of time, and to ask questions that language alone could not hold. You didn't inherit an addiction. You inherited a capacity. What you do with that capacity depends entirely on the container you build around it, the intention you bring, the community you bring it into, and whether you're using it to find something or to avoid something. Those are different things. Your ancestors understood the difference, even without a word for it. Tonight, somewhere on this planet, someone is sitting in a circle around a fire, drinking a brew that their great-great-grandparents drank, singing a song that hasn't changed in 500 years, asking the oldest question a human brain has ever asked in an altered state. Not what does this feel like, but what does this mean? What do I do with this? What am I supposed to carry back? Your ancestors began using substances for the same reason you reach for something that shifts how you feel. Because the weight of being conscious is real. Because the world has always been too large, too strange, too painful, and too beautiful to face with an unaltered mind, all of the time, without rest, without ritual, without some door in the wall of ordinary experience that opens onto something else. They weren't escaping. They were searching. And so, even now, even this week, even this morning, so are you.